Xavier Cortada is an artist that does inspiring and incredible work in Florida with a national reach and impact. He contributed to the National Climate Assessment Art by Climate and has won a number of awards, but you'll learn about his work in just a moment. And I love that it is so effective in catalyzing adaptation and mitigation measures. Adam runs the Cortada Foundation, which takes so much of the work that Xavier does and brings it out to communities through education and outreach effort and maximizes the impact of the work. Um, Please, Xavier and Adam, feel free to give yourself more of an introduction than that. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you for the moment.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick. Adam and I are so pleased to be here with you and the community you have assembled, a community that cares enough to be present and to make a difference. Today isn't just about creativity as something that you do on the side of your science. I think today's about creativity as something central to how we think, how we collaborate, and how we act. We are living in a time of overlapping crises. These are challenges that we can solve together, but not within the comfort of our silos. And what creativity does, it allows us to step beyond those boundaries and it forces us to listen, to imagine, to build bridges. Adam, if I could have you go through some slides, I think I'd like to take folks on a little journey through the way I have done this. I've created art at both poles to help address environmental issues at every point in between. And this session invites you to think differently and to recognize that interdisciplinary, community engaged work, it's not just something that's nice to have. I actually think it's necessary if we want to develop science that is meaningful, responsive, and impactful. Next slide. I went to Antarctica with the National Science Foundation. I was invited to go there to create art about climate science. But in that experience, while I was there in Antarctica, I got to speak to glaciologists who gave me chunks of ice from the Western Arctic ice sheet. Ice that they were looking to see the human impacts on climate, on our atmosphere. And I thought to take those ice pieces and turn my laboratory turned studio into a place where I would try to recreate Antarctica. Next slide. I would take those ice pieces and I added pigment to them and I would melt them to create these images that were made in Antarctica with pieces of Antarctica about Antarctica, but they weren't about Antarctica. They were about where Antarctica was going. I called these pieces Antarctic ice paintings. And as anyone would do in their normal field, I took these paintings back to the spaces where paintings normally go. Next slide. We took them to exhibits. We would hang them at exhibitions to let people know about the fact that humans are impacting our climate and the climate is causing the glaciers to melt with the heating of our planet, and that would cause our oceans to rise and have consequences. But at the same time that I was creating that piece for Antarctica, it's like an 18-month process between the time you get your award and the time you get on the ice. I was also involved in another project, a project that was less traditional. It's what we call an engaged art project. Adam, if we go to the next slide, it was called the Reclamation Project. What I did is I was trying to respond to the fact that mangroves, wetlands in my community were being mowed down, were being bulldozed in order to expand a highway. And I wanted people to understand the importance of wetlands and recognize their absence. So I created this participatory art project where I invited volunteers to walk through mangroves and learn about the beauty and importance of the wetlands, but then created a process that invited them to be part not just of the conversation, but of the solution. Next slide. We took mangroves from a forest and dangled them in modernist grids, in rows and columns, like the streets and avenues that had literally bulldozed that very barrier island where that Starbucks sits. And we hung them there for people to see these vertical nurseries. The important part of the process is that it wasn't about telling someone about the problem, but it was about inviting them, in this case, the participants who collected the mangroves, the volunteers who installed the installations, the collaborators who went into the store, spoke to the barista, and asked us if we could hang the mangroves on the wall. It became a process where the community itself realized that there was a problem, but that they could be a part of that solution. And it is that initial eco art project that has driven my work since that 2006 installation. In fact, through my foundation, I've created a series of other projects. One that followed this one immediately, Adam, is the Native Flags Project. In the Native Flags Project, I wanted us just not to understand the importance of coastal reforestation, but I also wanted us to understand the importance of planting and regrowing our native tree canopy. But again, we need to figure out how to use our creativity to speak to the folks who already aren't involved in tree planting, the folks who aren't already part of the solution. So I wanted to create a cadre of engaged citizens who would use an art process, not necessarily to plant a tree. I could hire nursery folk to do that, but to use an art process instead to transform the way they saw their role. We had them plant a tree and a green flag in front of their home and then ask their neighbor to do the same, because that green flag served as a catalyst for conversation in a way that just planting a native tree wouldn't have. So this is the beauty next and the wonder of art, where we could use a series of myriad of invitations of processes that don't allow people to scream at each other or talk about ideology, but instead have people come together and figure out creative solutions to a problem. And that to me is the beauty and the wonder of participatory art. In this case, the first slide is creating a slide of a sculpture that invites participants in the community to plant wildflowers at their homes, just like one at their roundabout in their community. And like that, different artistic innovations and processes created at the time allowed participants to do the same kind of thing. The Seahorse Society is a way of having us reframe a problem or an issue. I was worried about our seagrasses being destroyed in Miami-Dade County and knew that people cared more about its inhabitants than what they would consider seaweed. So I created the Seahorse Society so that we protect the seagrasses and in so doing protect its habitats. Next. And like that, I think the power and the beauty of art is that it opens channels for innovation, for creativity, for empathy. An endangered world, importantly, I created a participatory art project where I invited 360 individuals to try to find how they could help biodiversity loss on our planet. I needed to talk to them about the sixth mass extinction, but not in a way that would depress them, right, or paralyze them, but in a way that would let them know that they could act locally to have global impacts. So each of these individuals, volunteers, 360 of them, co-created an art piece, right? It wasn't a directed piece, it was a co-created piece where they selected the animal that they wanted to adopt by engaging in eco actions locally that would then be have impact to support the animal. And we created a mile-long installation at Biscayne National Park where we displayed not just the fact that 360 individuals were doing something to protect biodiversity, but they themselves now were conveners, letting their friends and families and communities know that they were part of something bigger than themselves. And anyone who came to this national park would now understand the value of eco actions, of reducing the impact, the human impacts on the planet. And like that, time and time again, I use my participatory work in order to allow us to bring folks together, to reframe the way we think, to do something weird, to catalyze folks into action, and to create a platform where not only do we model creative problem solving, but we invite folks to be part of that solution. The project I'm proudest of is the underwater project. And I'm going to have next Adam, the executive director of my foundation, Adam Roberti, talk about this project and its relevance and importance. But the value of projects like this is that it allows us as a community, as a society, to not just look at a problem as something that's distant, but to make it real, to make it relevant, to find agency and purpose, and to work together and learn together to come up with some solutions. So you probably remember how I started this PowerPoint with a piece of ice that scientists gave me back in Antarctica in 2006. Let Adam tell you what has happened since.
Awesome. Thank you, Xavier. And hello, everyone. Nice to be here with you. So Xavier's gone through a number of different projects very briefly, and they have had their time and their impact. And where we are right now in 2025 is very heavily focused on the underwater. This is a massive initiative all across South Florida. And I will get to the ice paintings in a second, but even before I do, we'll talk briefly about what this looks like for us, right? This is what 6 feet of sea level rise does to Miami-Dade County. And the majority of people that live here have no idea that this is what is coming by the end of the century unless we rapidly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And so Xavier and I both live in Miami-Dade County currently. This is just north of Miami-Dade. If any of you guys have been to Broward County, I'm born and raised in Hollywood, Florida. It looks even worse. This is again 6 feet of sea level rise, and we are built on top of limestone rock in between the Atlantic Ocean and the Everglades, which is the river of grass, right? So we are incredibly vulnerable, and people generally are unaware, and we are continuing to build along the water's edge. We're continuing to develop as if there's no problem. And let alone the hurricanes that are getting stronger. Our drinking water comes from below ground in the aquifer, which is currently getting salinated. So how do we raise the consciousness of the population that lives in South Florida, not just so that they are aware, but so that they, as has been explained, so that they have a sense of agency and they can be part of the problem solving. And so if you were driving down your street and you saw a big number 7 in the middle of the intersection, you'd probably be like, what the heck is that doing there? Like, why is there a number 7 here? That wasn't there before, right? And at the same time that these different street intersections had these numbers, you started seeing yard signs with, again, ambiguous, odd, strange numbers. Why is there number 8 in front of this house, right? You can see the backdrop of this yard sign, and it is now familiar to you as it looks like one of Xavier's Antarctic ice paintings. Rather than putting the ice paintings in a gallery or an exhibit like the traditional artist would do, in a way, in an attempt to reach, the everyday person who is not necessarily going to an art museum or a climate show, Xavier decided to use those Antarctic ice paintings as backdrops for elevation yard signs. And so every single one of these things that you're about to see or that you're seeing so far are elevation markers. And what you see on this screen, these are sustainable concrete elevation sculptures that we are putting in Miami-Dade County parks. Again, everything has a QR code on it, like you saw in the yard sign in the last slide, because the hope here is that we are going to pique people's curiosity as they're walking down the sidewalk. Why is there a number 10? Why is there a number 2? What does that mean? And then you scan the QR code and you see that GIF of what 6 feet of sea level rise does, and then you're actually able to find your home's elevation above sea level. And Xavier was appointed a couple of years ago as the first ever artist in residence of Miami-Dade County by the mayor. And through that relationship, we are partnering with the Parks Department of the county to install one of these elevation sculptures in every single one of Miami-Dade County's 260 plus parks, right? And each one of these provide an opportunity for an event, for convening community. You can see in the top right of this picture, there's Xavier with some elderly folks, and what we are doing is a ritual where we take seawater from Biscayne Bay, right offshore, and we pour it one at a time on top of this sculpture as a dedication. And what we are doing is we're saying that we're going to do everything that we can so that this is the first time and the last time that saltwater touches the sculpture. We're going to fight for our land. We're going to fight for our home. And just like that, this project is incredibly versatile. It's able to reach people who are not having these conversations, whether it's at South Beach next to, the workout equipment where we're setting up an installation and an activation, or if it's working with high school students who are the ones who actually paint the intersections, right? Like that number 7 that I showed you earlier was not Xavier painting it. It was his design that students are then able to take and bring to life, which is super exciting and empowering for the students involved. Working with Broward County, we've wrapped buses. We're actually going to wrap another one in a couple of months, which is just driving all around, having people be like, "What is this thing?" Right? How can we make climate change accessible? How can we bring it to people where they're at, especially in a place that is so vulnerable, like Broward County, like Miami-Dade County. This is an image that is from the inside of Broward County Commission chambers. So in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, right in the government center, if you were to walk in or out of the commission chambers, you will see a big number 4 metal sculpture because that building is 4 feet above sea level. And if you parked your car down the street at this parking garage, you see a permanent ceramic elevation mural. Each one of these, again, is an opportunity to get people to think, to question, to dive in when they scan the QR code, right? And that's where we have found most success is with curious young students in elementary, middle, and high school and universities, but in Broward County specifically focused on middle and high school students who attend a big assembly, right? Xavier and I host a presentation with a bunch of students. They learn about climate change and sea level rise, but then importantly, we gift each and every one of them one of Xavier's Antarctic ice painting yard signs, and then they scan a QR code, they type their address, they find their elevation, they create their personalized sign that they then bring home. And now when they bring that home, their mom or their dad or whoever they live with is like, what the heck is this thing, right? And so that now you have a conversation going right there in the household with the family members where the students are the teachers, which is super exciting. So there's a couple of pictures here. We've done it in over a dozen schools in the last year. But what's really important here that I want to point out is that we also create a site-specific mural at the school. So now all of the students who are in that assembly are empowered and excited to tell their friends about why they now have a number 7 in the middle of their hallway, which was not there before, right? Because the rest of the students have no clue why there is a number 7 there. This is weird. That's what we're getting at. And at each one of these schools that we go to, we encourage them to help us grow the movement in their neighborhood. And obviously, you know that these kids are on TikTok, they're on Instagram. So given that they are on these things, as much as we may hate that they're on them, how can they use it for good? How can they help to amplify or spread the message to other friends and family members, right? Tagging us along the way. And I just wanted to quickly show you what that looks like when you do scan the QR codes. That's the video on the right there, where you see those GIFs. Again, this is very South Florida centric. Granted, it could be this project is very replicable in other vulnerable coastal communities. This app that you guys are welcome to use, and we can drop it in the chat. It works for anywhere in the United States. You can enter your address and it'll tell you your elevation, but then importantly, there's a button for how you can take action. So lowest hanging fruit is create a yard sign, put it in front of your house. Okay, you're gonna raise awareness and start conversations like that. But then importantly, what's next? So it's really important that we are talking to our elected officials, voicing our concerns, asking about solutions. What are we going to do? How are we going to advance adaptation and mitigation measures? And then we also created a list of Miami-Dade County and Broward County organizations for folks to get involved with. So thinking about us almost as like the connective tissue between community members and nonprofits, organizations who are on the ground doing great work. And lastly, we created something called the Underwater Intel. So this is an online resource hub. So there's videos and articles and documentary recommendations, podcasts, etc. Just so people have a trusted place that they can go to learn more. And in this, in this process of advancing this project, and as you guys know, getting the word out, getting climate change and to folks, improving climate literacy is difficult. And if you can have media help you in this process, it's very helpful. And so I'm not showing this slide to brag as much as to say, look, when you have an art project and you have something that's very visually appealing, it's exciting for folks, for CNN or for the Washington Post or for local news to want to cover it and share it because we have good visuals, good B-roll, right? And so this project has been featured by the National Academies. Xavier gave a TED Talk about this project and the Reclamation Project that we would invite anyone to watch. And I think I'm going to probably leave it at this and hand it back to Xavier. But I just want to say, when we're looking at our toolbox of things that we can use in this movement, We very, very strongly believe in arts and culture, and that interactive public art, socially engaged art is really, really underutilized. And we need to understand this power that we have, this creativity that we all can harness. And so I think with that I will leave it. I'll hand it back to Xavier, and I will say thank you for my part.
Thanks so much, Adam. That was really, really wonderful. It's exciting to have you lead a foundation and all the volunteers to help this work come to life. And in many ways, this is really just that. It's really a collaborative, co-creative space. Look, this is a project where residents of Miami stood in their home and were able to understand that the climate catastrophe, the climate crisis, was not something far away. It was made relevant and personal to them. And then it gave them a vehicle to communicate that with others, turned data, scientific data, elevation, into personal and civic identity. The process, this experiential activity, makes climate science participatory and place-based. I think, especially for the teachers in the room, I know it happened with adults and it happens to all these kids we work with. It gives you a sense of ownership and agency and leadership. And all I'm trying to do in my work is create a cadre of science literate, engaged, empathetic, and loving citizens. And they need to be able to develop those leadership skills, whether it's putting a yard sign with a number so that your neighbor says, what's that number 8? And then you can be that educator teaching them what you learned in class, or whether it's planting a tree and explain to the neighbors why migratory birds need that tree for food and shelter. And I think it's a great example of bridging art, science, policy, and community all together. And as you, and we're going to open it up for questions in a second, but as you look about the work you do, whether you're a university professor or a practitioner or work for a government or teaching kids or an artist, who are you not talking to? Who are you not engaging with that could benefit by reframing or speaking or connecting with differently? And what assumptions are you making by just staying in your field instead of coming out of that silo? And in every one of these things, I don't know if it was obvious to you, but there were community partners, whether it's schools or libraries or institutions or museums. There were community partners, governments, that helped make the project take hold. And to me, that's pivotal. I mean, that's what this relational type of engaged art does. It's not putting something on a frame and having a passive interaction, a unilateral conversation. It's basically about how to build, how to co-create. It is generative in every way. So how could a community partner reshape the way you do the work you do, whether it's a research project or part of your curriculum? Look, I think innovation begins when you listen differently. And I think in our world, the change is made not just by those who communicate, but by those who create, and I would argue, co-create. I invite you to look at your practice, look at your work, and find creative approaches of engaging others in the problem solving. Thank you so much for having us here. Oh, and if there's anything you'd like to know about us, just scan that QR code. You can go there and you can learn about the underwater. There's probably a link to the TED Talk. There's a couple of toolkits that you can download on how it is that you can bring the reclamation project or the underwater to your community on your own, like you yourself can implement them. And there's just information about our work and what we care about. Also, there's links to our social media pages in case you want to follow us there. So this is the work we do, and we're happy to share it with you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Xavier and Adam. I love this project. I love your work and your heart that's engaged with it. I'm just so glad you're here and grateful for both of you leading us in that presentation. While people think about questions that they'd like to put in the chat, which I'm sure we have a few of, we have some time for questions. But while folks are gathering their thoughts, I was wondering if you could talk about examples where you saw the art catalyze community action around adaptation or mitigation? I think some of those examples came up directly in your slides, but I'd love to hear you speak to that a little bit, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, look, I think what I am trying to do in many ways is create a new way of thinking. So the things I look to aren't what metrics or accomplishments occurred. I am looking to how it is that I'm changing the culture and the discourse of a society. I'm trying to create a society of care. And I think in our world, too often, it's about who can speak the loudest, right? Or who can get their thing done. And there are things that we need to do. I'm not shying away from that. But I think our lack of action comes more from apathy than from weakness. It's not that we lost the fight, it's that we didn't even bother fighting because we didn't care. And what I try to do in my work is try to draw those connections between the tens of thousands of individuals who have participated directly with my work and the hundreds of thousands who have seen those individuals' participation manifest itself in the planting of acres of wetlands, in the planting of thousands of trees, in the planting of thousands of yard signs, in the I don't know how many eyeballs in everything from PBS NewsHour to BBC that literally listen to 5 minutes of conversation, of discourse, but more than anything, of inspiration on how you have power, how you have voice. So the world that I operate in is one where I am trying to find ways of bringing us together, of finding commonality, of inspiring us, so that we can begin to take ownership, so that we can begin to love one another and see each other as connected to everything that lives on this planet, to everyone who lives on this planet, so that we can begin to shape our policies, shape our behavior at the pew and at the voting booth, our behavior at the retail outlet, and at the dais. That we can together understand that we're part of this broader community. And I have um, literally 30 years worth of examples of how it is that this comes to life. But I think the thing I want us to understand, and I think I especially want the teachers in the room to understand, that I'm not trying to persuade you to do something. I'm trying to invite you to be a part of something. I'm trying not to have you think like me. I'm trying you to engage in creative thoughts. And by creating these platforms, and also by raising awareness about issues that find solutions in the way people interact, I begin to do that. So those are the kind of things I've done. But again, everything from getting a municipality to accept the climate compact, to working with a community to try to get legislation passed to deal with heat and people who work outdoors. Everything from raising awareness so that the word sea level rise is impossible to ignore because of the impact, the way that I have changed the dialogue and the discourse, the way that the way that every single school in Miami-Dade County has planted native trees and had the native flag curriculum. That's 336 schools for an entire decade. The way that every single library in my community has participated in the wetland project called Plant. In other words, the deep penetration, the ability to infiltrate and integrate and change the culture of our local science museum by having it not be a place where you just see exhibits, but now as part of the museum process, people plant trees. Those are all transformations that occur. And what I'm trying to do is just create a space where that creativity allows all other thinkers to find new approaches and new ways of addressing the issues of our time. Adam, you may want
Thank
to
you.
add something to that since you're probably more short, sir, I'm a little long-winded compared to you.
It's all good. I think that there are other questions, so I think you answered it comprehensively.
Yeah, comprehensively is right.
No, I mean, I really appreciate the zoom out to, yeah, there's a lot of specific examples associated with your work, but the point of it is to open the space um, and connect that cognitive and affective realm and engage that creative space of engagement in new ways. Um, I think Joanna has a question that was in there, and I know that as a co-host, she can unmute, so I just want to invite her to do that.
Patrick. And I saw Tiffany's sharing some resources in there also, so love that. I was curious, and of course, if other folks have questions, please throw them in the chat because we want your brains like swirling around all these connections. Xavier, do you recommend that folks, because for me, I was like, I want to copy this and I want to copy that, and it needs to be my local tree, and then I'm going to do all these things. So do you advise that the teachers that are joining tonight connect with your foundation first and then try to bring it back locally to remix it, or do the reverse and find out like what art is happening already in my community and how do I maybe like connect those artists to your work so that they can learn and use your roadmap so they don't have to reinvent the wheel?
Yeah. In every way, it is about using art's elasticity to reach others. And there are different art forms. It's not just the participatory art that I create, and it's not even my participatory art. I think what my foundation can do, Adam and I joke about it a little bit, is that what we have is soap. And, if you're a soap dispenser, it's easy. We can give you some soap, right? Like we can literally give you the template of the project that you can use to dispense and help. But what I really want my soap to do is to inspire you and your community and your artists to come up with your own creative solution to whatever the problem is that your community is facing. So if it's easier to sort of pilot something that I have done, replicate it as a way of growing it, absolutely, reach out to us and let's see what can happen. But I think the value, if you're in a university, you have an art department, you have a theater department, you have a music department, and you're a scientist, there is so much you can do, not just to visualize data, but to find out ways of using art to bring in the community to share their wisdom, right? Their knowledge on how climate impacts their community so that your research can be stronger, better, and more informed. Not as a broader impacts thing, not as a way of doing something and then sharing it with a community, but using art as a way of convening and bringing in those community voices to help solve the problem. Well, just like that, a teacher and a local river that is suffering from environmental degradation and the individuals impacted by that, and maybe a nonprofit environmental group can together come up with, hey, what can we do here? And then they can invite either a local artist who has been doing that kind of work, or invite a local cultural group that wants to solve that. There are some resources that we can provide you. I'm the immediate past chair of our Cultural Affairs Council here in Miami-Dade County, and I created a green task force and wrote a couple of articles, including for American for the Arts, to talk about what cultural organizations can do when it comes to the climate. So I think that the easy answer I have for you is the following. I am happy, our foundation is more than happy to help you implement these projects that we have in your community. I do so with all the humility and by letting you know that there are so many Xavier Cortadas literally in your zip code, literally wanting to do this kind of work. And there are so many community members who need more than just information. The information exists. What they need is the invitation to be part of the solution. And what art does is it creates that space for you to convene and to let the community learn together and work together and to tap into their own creativity to problem solve. And I think if we do that in every zip code across America, we will not have a climate crisis.